I'm joined now by that Conservative MP, Steve Baker, to remind you who rejected Theresa May's deal 3 times. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. These proposals, then, they only change one part of Theresa May's deal. It's still how it was before. Things like the European Court of Justice, our relationship, still all there. How on earth can you support it?
Well, you're right that it does address specifically the backstop, which is the worst feature of the current pair of agreements. But the other thing that's worth remembering is that Boris has chosen a different destination and made perfectly plain that the arrangements in Ireland are not a bridge to the future relationship. They're specific arrangements for Ireland. This is a very dramatic change of destination. So Theresa May's deal was about a high alignment model in a single customs territory with high regulatory alignment for the whole UK. Boris Johnson's model is about special treatment for Northern Ireland and a free trade agreement as a destination, which is, of course, what the EU offered us. So if you look at the destination and the overall pattern, it's a dramatic shift. Well,
bits.
I don't know about overlook, and I've never said that.
But the point is, if this did turn into a deal, you would support it, you would give him your vote, because this is what Theresa May didn't have.
Well, obviously, we are looking to exit the European Union with a deal.
Yes.
Now, until we actually have the legal text from soup to nuts, we can't take a view. But I'm afraid Eurosceptics do examine these provisions with tedious detail, with an eye for tedious detail.
But the point is, you're on television this evening sounding some support, which is a movement from what you were doing before.
Yes, and this is because the overall destination has changed to a free trade agreement, which is compatible with.
Do you think this has a chance to deliver a deal by the 31st of October?
Yes, I do think it has a chance, but it really does. It really turns upon the European Union's willingness to recognise this really might be the last chance to get a deal, that Boris Johnson really is not going to choose to extend. If they get into that negotiating tunnel and engage on the substance of these proposals and also all the other issues with the withdrawal agreement, which I know our negotiators have raised with them, if they're willing to treat on all of those issues, it could well be that we emerge with a deal that I can proudly vote for and say to the Brexit party, this really is Brexit and you too should back it.
But a lot of people don't necessarily think this is going to get out the starting blocks, because people from right across the political spectrum, Northern Ireland, people like Jonathan Powell, one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement, have all warned that this particular proposal threatens that Good Friday Agreement, the peace process, and by creating some form of border.
Well, I'm confident if Lord Trimble were here, he would say that the backstop, as previously conceived, would threaten the Good Friday Agreement. So these debates have gone to and fro. I'm afraid everybody's a bit party-pre on this. They've got their own view on what they're trying to achieve. I'm very encouraged that the DUP seem to be on board for this. It meets their red lines in relation to consent on regulatory alignment, and it meets their red line on being inside a customs area with the UK. So,
if I could just bring up perhaps maybe an inconvenient detail at this point. If I'm looking at the letter that Boris Johnson sent to the EU today, he's only put that there are flexible and creative solutions to effectively avoid watchtowers being put back onto, he didn't say the watchtowers part, but this is the concern, to be put back onto a border. What are these flexible and creative solutions?
Well, I would encourage anybody really interested in the detail to download the Prosperity UK report into alternative arrangements. Now,
well, the Alternative Arrangements Group, the group of MPs, if I can, I did look at their report this evening, which they published in June 2019, and they said alternatives to the backstop, technological ones, that is, are not available right now. They'll only be available within 2 to 3 years. So we don't actually have technological checks that can perform this function. We need physical checks.
So I think you are referring to the Alternative Arrangements Group run by Prosperity UK with a parliamentary commission, which I'm also part of. We did recognise that the full suite of alternative arrangements would take some time to implement.
So we don't have them?
But it's by no means all of them. Many of the things can be done very, very quickly. Boris is still proposing an implementation period, which also, of course, has some disadvantages. But I'm afraid there are a number of things in there that nobody's talking about watchtowers. We're all committed to having no infrastructure on the border.
But the technology doesn't exist yet. No, you admitted that in that report yourself.
Well, no, I'm also coming to that point now. All of the technology required to deliver a seamless, compliant border in Northern Ireland absolutely exists.
Why has it never been used anywhere in the world, then?
It's a question of deploying it, and I'm afraid implementing things does take a little time. But we have a unique situation in Ireland.
So hang on a minute, are you actually saying that the Prime Minister has written to the EU saying we can do something that we can't actually do yet?
No,
because we're meant to be out on the 31st of October.
No, Emma, I'm not. The Prime Minister's chosen to adopt a different approach. So by going for regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland, that is a different approach. I referred to the Prosperity UK report because it does indicate the full suite which is possible. The Prime Minister's chosen a different approach, which is Northern Ireland in the customs territory of the UK,
yes.
and the whole island.
Which we did as our explanation to get into this, to try and put people in that picture. So let me ask you this. You sound very convinced of this. I know you have to see all the detail, but if this deal, if this becomes a deal, and there is in touching distance of getting it through, because perhaps there's just not enough time right now with 29 days to get everybody to look at this that needs to, get a deal to actually bring back to Parliament to vote and for it to happen. If it just required 5 days more, 10 days more, would you support an extension?
So Boris is absolutely clear he is not going to choose to extend.
No, but sorry,
I support him in not extending.
You just made the point yourself that sometimes things take a little while to implement. You know how meetings work, how people need to get round this.
Oh, indeed.
Would you support in any event if it was very close because you want to leave with a deal?
We always go to and fro over this one. We're not going to extend. We're not going to choose to extend.
So you wouldn't, even if it was in touch... Well, is that not slightly reckless? What's the point of not extending by even 2 days?
So at this point, if Parliament is willing to back a deal and legislate for a deal, it's going to need to do it awfully fast. We are so close to the wire now that Parliament would need to legislate for this deal with the spirit of alacrity that it used on the Benn Act. I'll talk of it kindly. And if Parliament is willing to do a similar
But it's not just
process,
about Parliament, though.
Well, indeed.
It's about the EU that has to get the deal back. So my point is, there may be a slight delay, and you're saying you're not willing to accept that.
I'm not the
even if it's a process point.
I'm not the Prime Minister.
But he needs your vote.
Well, he doesn't need my vote to seek an extension, and he's not going to extend. But look, I'm sorry, at this point...
If he extends, should he resign?
No.
Well, he said we would leave on the 31st.
But Emma, I'm sorry, at this point, we're all trying to be supremely reasonable to try and get a deal which is Brexit worth having, not Brexit in name only. I've been absolutely clear at conference this week, for which I was cheered, that if this deal turns out to be Brexit in name only, I will vote against it, whatever the cost,
but the point is
including losing the whip.
You sound like you believe that this could be the deal, and I'm just putting it to you, if you really believe that, and if it's to be believed by people watching this, and it's sincere from the Prime Minister through to yourself, then why wouldn't you just allow a bit of extra time if it was needed? Because
if the moment we get into going into extra time, we will cause the most enormous political difficulty in this country.
OK, so then a final point.
Absolutely.
I'm so intrigued to ask you this question. Has Boris Johnson told you, Steve Baker, as a Conservative MP, as a passionate Brexiteer, how he will leave without a deal on the 31st of October if this doesn't come off legally? Has he told you how he'll do it?
I've had a number of conversations with a number of ministers. I'm very clear that they believe they have a way through. I don't want to know what it is, because the moment it's discussed...
You don't want to know? You're a curious man who just studies the detail.
I am a curious man. I'm trying to give you the answer. The answer is I don't wish to know, because the moment it's in the public domain, our opponents will act with great furious anger to try and stop it. And I'm afraid when you look at their willingness to overturn every constitutional convention, to break their promises in manifestos, to try and overturn a referendum result. I mean, they have breached principle. They have breached the rules of the House of Commons.
The point is there is a way.
Our opponents are willing to stop at nothing to stop Brexit, and in such circumstances, I'm quite happy that the government that they wish to stop Brexit, and I am quite happy that the government should enjoy secrecy on this point.
The public may not feel like that, but that is your take. Thank you very much.
It's only a matter of weeks.
29 days. Steve Baker, we'll talk again. Thank you for your time this evening.
You're welcome.